This week, the New Zealand government officially introduced legislation that would ban the types of weapons used in the deadly attack against 2 mosques last month.
So those proposed changes take effect on April 12th, and they have sparked praise from some U.S. leaders and also renewed determination to pass some similar legislation in the states here. Yesterday, the Pittsburgh City Council approved legislation that would place restrictions on the military-style assault weapons that were used in the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue shooting. And joining us now for a deep dive into the oft-prickly issue of gun legislation is Executive Director of Guns Down America, Igor Volsky. He is also the author of a new book called Guns Down: How to Defeat the NRA and Build a Safer Future with Fewer Guns, which will be released next week. Congratulations, Igor. Great to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
What is in this book that is different? What is the argument that you're making? Because you go after the NRA, but you also go after Democrats and the left.
I do. I'm really trying to reframe this debate, because what happened in New Zealand and what happens really in many areas around the world is lawmakers recognize that it's not about dividing people into good guys and bad guys and just taking the guns away from the bad guys. That doesn't work, particularly in a country like this one, where 2/3 of our gun deaths are suicides. So what we need to do is change the environment in which guns are available. And so what I argue is we need to raise the standard of gun ownership. We need to make guns harder to get for everybody, and that will keep everybody safe.
Well, I'm glad that you acknowledge that point, that the 2/3 of the gun deaths are suicides. Now, I think the crux of your argument, right, is this new Second Amendment compact.
Yeah.
So can you describe for us, I guess, the tenets, the main tenets of what that means, and then we'll get into whether it will actually affect on whether people will continue to commit suicides with guns.
So the compact is really in 3 different buckets. Bucket number 1 is really cracking down on the gun industry. As we know, the products they produce are not regulated. That's why we have assault weapons. That's why we have these militarized handguns. Bucket number 2.
Well, what does militarized handgun mean?
Well, the militarized handguns are guns that use larger rounds. The rounds are coming at you faster. They're killing you in ways that past generations of guns did not. That's, for instance, happening in Chicago. Bucket number 2 is making guns harder to get. That's licensing and registration. If you want to get a gun, go to a police station, get fingerprinted, go through a comprehensive background check, get a field test, you get a license, then you can get a gun, register that gun. Bucket number 3 is really investing in community-based violence intervention programs. These are the programs running in urban cities all across the country that have reduced gun violence significantly.
Okay, what is it about those programs that have reduced gun violence? And what I'm trying to get at here is this a gun problem, or is it a cultural problem of the misuse of weapons, lack of education, and the ease of ability to get one illegally on the streets?
Well, look, probably a combination of all of these different things. In Chicago, the illegal guns, many of them come from Indiana, where guns are very easy to get. In terms of the programs, what works is that they're community-based and community-driven. You have folks who know the people in those communities, in the communities where you have the most gun violence, and they know and they're trained how to diffuse that gun violence effectively. And so you've seen reductions from 30 to 70%. They're very effective, but they don't have funding.
Igor, Democrats have been terrified of this issue, as you know. They've been, and I think part of the problem is the types of changes, the let's enhance the background check, something that's not going to make anyone uncomfortable, changes that Democrats argue for. I think most people look at it and go, okay, but is that really going to solve the problem? On the other hand, guns are a cultural kind of token. And I think about my own father, who is an NRA member, who loves guns, and he would, if you went down the line and say, do you want to get rid of bump stocks? Yes. Do you want to have more background checks? Yes. All of that. But then he gets a little postcard in the mail from the NRA that says this person's against your right to own a gun and this person's not. And he tends to vote the way that they ask him to, even though on the specific issues, he tends to be where Democrats are. Are we wrong? Are Democrats wrong to be nervous about how they approach this issue from a political perspective?
Well, look, in writing Guns Down, I traveled across the country talking to gun owners. What surprised me is how many agree with me about this idea of raising the standard of gun ownership, because a lot of gun owners are responsible gun owners. They don't have a problem of getting a license to get a gun.
My dad is a very responsible gun owner.
See, there you go. And so what you often hear from the NRA, which is the loudest voice in the room, are the opinions and beliefs of the gun industry, who fund significant parts of the NRA, not of most of the members of the NRA who actually agree with this idea that our country is a bit out of whack when it comes to guns. There is certain rights that you have when it comes to owning a gun, but there's also community interest in keeping your community safe. And all I'm arguing is that before you get a gun, you should be able to show your community that you can handle that gun responsibly.
So raising the standards of gun ownership, I would absolutely agree with. But what are the
Common
tenets?
ground already.
Yeah,
Perfect.
but one of the tenets that you're getting at is, trying to buy back guns, the banning of semi-automatic weapons. Now, these are things that will not go. I mean, I know many people also in the gun community, and these, vast majority of the weapons that they own are semi-automatic. People who own rifles, they use them. They've looked at them as a core tenet of the self-defense. Now, if those were to be banned and those were to be given up, the reality is, and this is what the NRA will always say, is that the bad guys are not going to give up their military, so-called military-style assault weapons, and responsible gun owners are, putting the common person at a disadvantage, which really does go to the opposite of the Second Amendment's real responsibility. So how would you deal with the problem of the criminals having, in many cases, some of the most and best and advanced weapons, whenever responsible gun owners wouldn't have the ability to defend themselves in those cases?
Well, look, when you change the environment around gun ownership and you make guns harder to get, there's certainly going to be some small element of hardened criminals who are going to do whatever it takes to get a gun, right? These are the kind of people who drink and drive, who don't wear their seatbelts, who speed, and who die on our roads, regardless of the fact that we made those laws so much harder. They're also the same people who murder, even though murder is illegal, right? So, yes, I mean, there are going to be people who break laws and do what they do. But what we've seen in countries around the world, in states that have tougher gun laws, is that changing the environment does decrease both firearm suicides and firearm homicides, even if it doesn't eliminate it entirely.
I think you could also point to fully automatic weapons here, which are much, 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 much more difficult to get
Very regulated.
than any other firearm.
But the thing is, they were at the beginning of the supply chain. Now the full market is flooded with these things, and the secondary market will always exist. So unless, you're advocating literally going and seizing those weapons, I don't really see a way in which this will ever materialize as reality.
So to be clear, there are about 100,000 what we know as machine guns in this country, but they're highly regulated, and they've been regulated since about 1934.
Right.
You need a special license, you register it, you face huge fines if you transfer that firearm. That's why we don't hear, part of the reason why we don't hear about shootings with machine guns. I'm proposing the same kind of structure, a similar structure for assault weapons, and then if folks want to buy them back, I'm proposing voluntary buyback programs. They can do that. But this has worked in the past in this country, and I think it can work on these kinds of guns as well.
Quickly, is the NRA in financial trouble?
I think they're certainly not thriving in the Trump era. The gun industry isn't thriving in the Trump era.
They don't have a boogeyman.
They don't have a boogeyman, exactly. We'll see what happens with the 2020 election, who becomes their boogeyman. But when you hear the NRA, all you got to remember is the arguments that they make are the goal is two different things. One is to sell more NRA memberships, dues are down, and two is to help the industry sell more guns because the industry directly contributes to the NRA. A lot of the gun manufacturers do both domestic and foreign.
Interesting. Igor.
Thank you, Igor.
Congrats
so much,
again on the book.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Next up on Rising, a historic election in Chicago. Meanwhile, some Democrats are reassessing Joe Biden's 2020 chances in this new Me Too era.
And the president's winter White House turns into the set of a spy film. Team Rising weighs in on the latest Mar-a-Lago scandal, and all of that next.